I stood on the stage of the National Science Foundation's annual gala, the crystal trophy heavy in my hands, and watched my parents' seats remain empty. The spotlight was hot on my face, the applause thunderous, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I felt nothing but satisfaction at their absence. Dr. Emily Chen, the director was saying, his voice booming through the grand ballroom of the Washington Hilton, has revolutionized our understanding of neural plasticity with her groundbreaking research. At only 28 years old, she has secured over $15 million in grant funding and published in Nature, Science, and Cell. Tonight, we honor her with our highest distinction, the Breakthrough Scientist of the Year Award. The audience rose to their feet. I could see my mentor, Dr. Patricia Walsh, wiping tears from her eyes. My research team was cheering wildly. News cameras flashed. But rows 17 and 18 seats C and D, the tickets I'd sent to my parents' address with a handwritten note, remained conspicuously vacant. Perfect. Because this time, I knew exactly where they were. They were 300 miles away in my hometown, attending my sister Vanessa's community theater production of The Sound of Music. She was playing a nun, a non-speaking nun. It was her 7th community theater role this year, and they hadn't missed a single one. Just like in my first life, they'd chosen her over me, but this time I'd planned for it. In my previous life, I'd died at 32 in a car accident on my way to accept this very award. I'd been so exhausted from years of overwork, trying desperately to earn my parents' recognition, that I'd fallen asleep at the wheel. The last thought I'd had before the truck's headlights filled my vision was wondering if they'd finally be proud of me when they read about the award in my obituary. Spoiler alert, they weren't. At my funeral, which I somehow watched from a place between life and death, my mother had sobbed, "If only she'd been more like Vanessa. Vanessa would never have worked herself to death. She knows how to enjoy life." Then the universe, or God, or karma, or whatever, had given me a gift. I'd opened my eyes in my 18-year-old body, lying in my childhood bedroom, with every memory of the next 14 years intact. I remembered everything. Every dismissal, every comparison, every time my achievements were minimized while Vanessa's mediocrity was celebrated. I remembered my father missing my high school graduation because Vanessa had a dance recital. I remembered my mother forgetting my acceptance to MIT because Vanessa had gotten a callback for a toothpaste commercial. I remembered spending Christmas alone in my college dorm because Vanessa wanted the whole family at her boyfriend's house. Most of all, I remembered the soul-crushing realization that nothing I ever did would make them see me. In my first life, I'd killed myself trying. In this life, I decided to do something different. I decided to let them miss everything. The abuse started when I was 7 and Vanessa was 5. That's when she did her first beauty pageant, and my parents discovered she was special. Before that, I'd been their little genius. I could read at 3, multiply at 4, and was doing algebra by 6. My mother used to bring me to her book club to show me off. My father told everyone at his office about his brilliant daughter. Then Vanessa won Little Miss Sunflower, and everything changed. Suddenly, intelligence was less important than beauty. Academic achievement was stressful and unhealthy, while pageant competitions were character-building and confidence-boosting. My parents drained their savings, including the college fund they'd started for me, to pay for Vanessa's coaching, costumes, and competition fees. I still remember the day my mother sat me down at the kitchen table, her face apologetic but firm. I was 9 years old. "Emily, honey, we need to talk about your college fund." "Okay," I'd said, still naive enough to think she wanted to discuss adding to it. "Well, Vanessa's pageant career is really taking off, and these competitions are expensive. The thing is, you're so smart that you'll definitely get scholarships. You don't need our money, but Vanessa, she needs our support to reach her full potential." I'd nodded, not understanding that this was the first of many times I'd be told my needs didn't matter, because I was capable of meeting them myself. By the time I was in middle school, the pattern was set. I came home with straight A's, and my mother would glance at my report card and say, "That's nice, dear." Vanessa came home with C's and D's, and they'd take her out for ice cream, praising her for trying her best, and reminding her that grades aren't everything. I won the regional science fair 3 years in a row. They missed the award ceremony every time. Vanessa got a participation ribbon in a local art show, and they threw her a party. High school was worse. I was valedictorian, captain of the academic decathlon team, and earned a perfect SAT score. I also worked 2 part-time jobs to save for college. Meanwhile, Vanessa was failing junior year for the second time, but she'd landed a role as girl number 3 in a local commercial, so she was the star of every family gathering. The night I got my acceptance letter from MIT with a full scholarship, I ran downstairs, envelope in hand, bursting with excitement. My parents were in the living room with Vanessa, who was crying. "What's wrong?" I asked, still clutching my letter. "Vanessa didn't get the call back for that shampoo commercial," my mother said, her arm around my sister. "She's devastated." "Oh," I said. "I'm sorry, Nessa, but hey, I got into MIT, full scholarship." My father barely looked up from comforting Vanessa. "That's great, Em. Listen, can we talk about this later? Your sister needs us right now." I stood there, for a moment, the acceptance letter growing heavy in my hand. Then I went back to my room and cried alone. That was my life. Every achievement minimized, every milestone lonely, every success a private celebration, while Vanessa's failures received more attention than my victories. College was a relief because I was away from them, but it was also lonely because they never visited. They'd promised to come for parents' weekend, then cancel because Vanessa had an audition. I'd invite them to lectures where I was presenting my research, and they'd RSVP yes, then not show up because Vanessa needed help moving into her latest apartment. I graduated summa cum laude from MIT. They didn't come to the ceremony. Vanessa had a showcase at her acting class. I got into Harvard's PhD program with a full fellowship. My mother's response, "That's wonderful, honey. Did you hear Vanessa got cast in a touring production? They're going to 3 whole cities." My dissertation won the university's highest honor. They missed the defense. Vanessa was competing on a reality dating show, and they were in the studio audience. I published my first paper in Nature at 26, the youngest solo author in the journal's history. I called to tell them, and my father said, "Congratulations." "Listen, I have to go. We're throwing Vanessa a premiere party for her YouTube channel." And through it all, I kept trying. I kept hoping. I kept thinking that maybe the next achievement would be big enough, important enough, to make them finally see me. In my first life, I worked myself into an early grave chasing that impossible dream. But when the universe gave me a second chance, I realized something. They would never see me. Not because my achievements weren't impressive enough, but because they'd decided long ago that Vanessa was the child worth watching. Nothing I did would change their minds, so I stopped trying to change them. Instead, I changed my strategy. This time around, I would succeed not to earn their love, but to prove I didn't need it. The turning point came 3 months after I woke up in my 18-year-old body. It was December of my senior year of high school. In my first life, I'd spent weeks agonizing over my college applications, trying to craft the perfect essays to make my parents proud. I'd stayed up until 3 in the morning, written and rewritten every word, and nearly had a breakdown trying to be perfect. This time, I wrote them in an afternoon, because I already knew they'd work. I'd gotten into MIT before, and my essays had been good enough then. But more importantly, I stopped caring what my parents thought of them. I didn't show my mother my personal statement. I didn't ask my father to proofread my supplementary essays. I just submitted them and moved on with my life. Meanwhile, Vanessa was in her 4th year of high school. She'd failed sophomore year in my first life and was on track to do it again. She was now 19 still, living at home, still doing pageants and community theater, still convinced she was on the verge of being discovered. My parents were still draining their accounts to fund her delusions. One night, I was in my room studying for an AP calculus exam when my mother knocked on my door. "Emily, can we talk?" "Sure," I said, not looking up from my textbook. I knew what was coming. This conversation had happened in my first life, too. She sat on my bed, wringing her hands. "Your father and I have been talking, and, well, you know Vanessa is really struggling with school right now." "Uh-huh. And we think it would be really helpful if you could tutor her. You're so good at math and science, and she just needs someone patient to help her understand." In my first life, I'd said yes. I'd spent hours trying to teach Vanessa basic algebra, which she'd refused to learn because math is stupid and I'm going to be famous anyway. It had been a waste of time that had cut into my own studying. and my parents had somehow blamed me when Vanessa failed anyway. This time, I looked up from my book and said, "No." My mother blinked. "What?" "No, I'm not going to tutor Vanessa. I have my own work to do." "But Emily, she's your sister. Family helps family." I wanted to laugh. Family helps family? Where was that energy when I needed help applying for scholarships because they'd spent my college fund on pageant dresses? Where was that attitude when I'd asked them to attend just one of my academic decathlon competitions? But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said calmly, "I'm sure you can hire a tutor. I recommend using the money you were planning to spend on Vanessa's next pageant entry fee." My mother's face turned red. "That's incredibly selfish, Emily. Your sister looks up to you." "Does she?" I asked, genuinely curious. In my first life and this one, Vanessa had never once shown interest in my life, my work, or my achievements. Has she ever asked me about my day, my classes, my plans? My mother stood up, flustered. "I don't appreciate your attitude, young lady. When I was your age, when you were my age, you were already married and pregnant with me," I interrupted. "And you've told me 100 times that you wished you'd gone to college instead. So why are you upset that I'm prioritizing my education?" She left without another word, and I went back to studying. That was the moment I truly committed to my new path. I would excel, not for them, but for myself. I would achieve everything I'd achieved in my first life and more, but this time, I wouldn't waste energy trying to make them care. And when the big moments came, the awards, the recognition, the triumphs, I would let them miss every single one. I would let them reap exactly what they'd sown. A daughter who no longer needed their validation because she'd learned to validate herself. The first major test of my resolve came in April of senior year. I'd been accepted to MIT, Harvard, Stanford, and Caltech. Full scholarships to all four. In my first life, I'd anxiously awaited my parents' advice on which to choose, desperately hoping they'd engage with this massive decision. They'd been too busy helping Vanessa film audition tapes. This time, I made the decision alone. MIT had the best program for what I wanted to study, and I'd been happy there before. I accepted their offer and put deposits down for housing without telling my parents. 2 weeks later, my mother found the acceptance letter I'd left casually on the kitchen counter. "Emily, you got into MIT. Why didn't you tell us?" I looked up from my breakfast. "I did tell you last month when the letter came. You were helping Vanessa prepare for that commercial callback." "I don't remember that." "I know," I said simply. She frowned, sensing criticism but unable to pinpoint it. "Well, this is wonderful. We'll have to celebrate. When should we take you out to dinner?" "That's okay. You don't need to." "Don't be silly. Our daughter's going to MIT. Of course we're celebrating." But even as she said it, I could see her mentally calculating. Vanessa had something that week, an acting class showcase or a pageant. I couldn't remember which. My mother was already trying to figure out how to squeeze me in around Vanessa's schedule. "Actually," I said, "I'm going out with friends this weekend to celebrate." "Don't worry about it." "Oh." She looked relieved and guilty at the same time. "Well, if you're sure, maybe we can do something next month." We never did. Instead, I took myself out to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. I ordered the most expensive item on the menu, paid with money from my part-time job, and toasted myself with a Shirley Temple. It was one of the most satisfying meals of my life. Graduation came in June. In my first life, my parents had missed the ceremony because Vanessa had a dance recital. They'd promised to make it up to me and never did. I'd walked across that stage, accepted my valedictorian honors alone, and cried in the bathroom afterward. This time I knew what was coming. A week before graduation, my mother approached me nervously. "Emily, honey, we need to talk about your graduation." "What about it?" "Well, Vanessa has her dance recital that day. It's a really big one. It's at the Civic Center, and there will be talent scouts there. It could be her big break." In my first life, I'd begged. I'd cried. I'd said, "I'm valedictorian. I have to give a speech. Please, just this once, choose me." It hadn't worked. This time I just shrugged. Okay. My mother blinked. Okay? Yeah, okay, go to Vanessa's recital. You're not upset? Why would I be upset? I asked. You've made your priorities clear for 11 years. Why would I expect today to be different? Her face crumpled. That's not fair, Emily. We've always loved you both equally. I could have laughed. I could have screamed. I could have listed every missed event, every forgotten milestone, every time they'd chosen Vanessa over me. But I didn't. Because in this life, I wasn't trying to make them see their mistakes. I was just letting them make them. It's fine, Mom. Really, I'll see you after. She left looking uncertain, like she knew something was wrong but couldn't articulate what. On graduation day, I walked across that stage with my head held high. I delivered my valedictorian speech to a crowd that included my teachers, my friends, and Dr. Patricia Walsh, who'd driven 3 hours from MIT to watch a promising prospective student graduate. My parents' seats were empty, but I barely noticed. After the ceremony, Dr. Walsh took me out for lunch. Your parents couldn't make it? She asked carefully. Family obligation, I said, which was technically true. She studied me with the sharp intelligence that would make her the best mentor I'd ever have. You know, Emily, I've been teaching for 30 years. I've seen a lot of brilliant students, but the ones who go the furthest aren't always the smartest. They're the ones who are internally motivated. They do the work for themselves, not for validation from others. That's good, I said, because I'm not getting validation from others. She smiled. Then you're going to do just fine. That summer, while my parents threw Vanessa a party for landing a non-speaking role in a commercial for a local car dealership, I worked 2 jobs and saved every penny. I bought my own laptop, my own dorm supplies, my own everything. I didn't want to owe them anything. In August, when it was time to leave for MIT, my parents offered to drive me. That's okay, I said. I've already arranged a ride. With who? My mother asked. A friend. Actually, I was taking the bus. But I didn't want their help. I didn't want the 4-hour car ride of them, comparing me to Vanessa or reminding me to have fun and not take things too seriously, while simultaneously expecting me to excel academically since I'd always been so smart. I left on a Tuesday morning while they were still asleep. I left a note on the kitchen counter. Heading to MIT, I'll call when I get there. I didn't call, and they didn't ask why. College in my second life was different from my first. I wasn't desperately trying to balance academic excellence with maintaining a relationship with my parents. I wasn't spending emotional energy hoping they'd visit or call or show interest. I just lived. And without that weight, I soared. I finished my undergraduate degree in 3 years instead of 4, graduating with a 4.0 and 6 published papers. I was recruited by Harvard's PhD program with full funding plus a stipend. My parents learned about all of this through Facebook posts. If they looked at social media, which I doubted, they called occasionally, awkward conversations where they'd ask surface-level questions about my classes and then launch into detailed updates about Vanessa's latest auditions. I'd listen politely, give monosyllabic responses, and hang up feeling nothing. The nothing was the strangest part. In my first life, their disinterest had been a constant source of pain. In this life, I'd successfully cultivated indifference. They were like distant relatives I barely knew, people I was technically related to but shared no real connection with. My PhD work focused on neural plasticity and memory formation. It was brilliant, even if I do say so myself. But it was also deeply personal in ways I could never explain. I was a woman who'd died and been reborn with her memories intact. Of course, I was fascinated by how memories shaped identity and behavior. My dissertation proposed a revolutionary framework for understanding how traumatic memories could be processed and integrated without losing the self. It suggested that the brain was far more plastic and resilient than previously believed. The work earned me immediate recognition in the field. I defended my dissertation on a Wednesday in November. It was 3 days before Thanksgiving, and the defense was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. I sent my parents an invitation 6 months in advance. They RSVP'd. Yes, I knew they wouldn't come. In my first life, they'd missed this too. Vanessa had needed help moving into a new apartment. But I sent the invitation anyway because I wanted the empty seats. I wanted the visual reminder of exactly who they'd chosen not to support. My committee, 5 of the most distinguished neuroscientists in the world, grilled me for 3 hours. I answered every question flawlessly. Dr. Walsh cried during my acknowledgments, where I thanked my mentors, my friends, and my colleagues, making no mention of family. When it was over, my committee chair shook my hand. Dr. Chen, that was one of the finest defenses I've seen in my career. Your parents must be incredibly proud. I glanced at the empty seats in the back row. I'm sure they would be if they were here. That evening, my mother called. Emily, I'm so sorry we missed your defense. Vanessa needed help with... It's fine, I said. We'll make it up to you at Thanksgiving. Actually, I'm spending Thanksgiving with friends in Boston. Oh. She sounded hurt. We assumed you'd come home. Why would I come home? To sit at a table where Vanessa dominated every conversation? To watch my mother dote on her while my father praised her latest almost breakthrough? To spend a holiday feeling invisible in my own family? I have plans, I said simply. Well, maybe Christmas then. Maybe. I spent Thanksgiving with Dr. Walsh's family, where her teenage kids asked me excited questions about my research, and her husband toasted the brilliant Dr. Chen. It was one of the best Thanksgivings of my life. My postdoc took me to Stanford, where I joined a lab doing cutting-edge work in neuroscience. My research started generating serious buzz. I was invited to give talks at conferences, and my papers were being cited extensively. At 25, I was named one of 30 under 30 in science by Forbes magazine. My parents sent a congratulatory text. It was 3 words, saw the article. Vanessa, now 23, was still living at home, still auditioning, still convinced fame was just around the corner. She'd done some background work on a TV show filmed in our state and considered herself a professional actress. I learned all this from my mother's occasional phone calls, which had taken on a desperate quality. She knew something was wrong between us, but couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge what. So she filled the silence with updates about Vanessa, perhaps hoping I'd ask questions or engage. I never did. Vanessa's been cast as a featured extra on that new Netflix show filming downtown, my mother said during one call. That's nice. She's so excited. She thinks this could lead to bigger roles. I'm sure it could. Don't you want to know more about it? Not really. Silence, then carefully. Emily, are you angry with us about something? I could have laughed. Something. As if it were one thing, one incident, one moment of disappointment. As if it weren't 11 years of systematic neglect. No, Mom, I'm not angry. Then why are you so cold? I'm not cold. I'm just busy. I'm running a research lab, writing grants, publishing papers. I don't have a lot of free time for chatting. You used to tell us everything. That was a lie, but I didn't correct her. I'd never told them everything. I'd stopped telling them anything important around age 7 when I realized they weren't listening. I need to go, I said. Lab meeting in 10 minutes. I hung up before she could respond. That Christmas, I went skiing in Colorado with colleagues. I posted photos on Facebook, not for my parents, but for myself. Pictures of me laughing, snowboarding, drinking hot chocolate by a fire. Living a full, happy life without them. My mother called on Christmas Day. We missed you at dinner. I'm sure Vanessa kept you entertained. It's not the same without you. It was exactly the same without me. It had always been the same without me. But I didn't say that. At 27, I was recruited to start my own lab at Johns Hopkins with a massive startup package. It was a huge coup. Most scientists don't get their own labs until their mid-30s at the earliest. But my work was too important, too groundbreaking, for the university to risk losing me to a competitor. I called my parents to tell them. It was a test, though I wasn't sure what I was testing for, but that's wonderful, honey, my mother said as Johns Hopkins is a good school. A good school. It was one of the top research institutions in the world, and I was being given resources most scientists could only dream of. But it was a good school. Vanessa's been cast in a local commercial, my mother continued. It's for a furniture store. She has 3 lines. Great, I said. She's thinking about moving to LA. Your father and I are considering helping her with rent out there while she gets established. Of course they were. They'd spent my college fund on pageants. They'd spent their savings on acting classes. Now they'd spend their retirement on LA rent for a 25-year-old who'd never booked a significant role and never would. Sounds like a plan, I said. We're so proud of both our girls, my mother said, trying to bridge a gap she didn't even understand existed. Sure, I said. Then, I have to go. I'm meeting with my new department chair. I hung up and stared at my phone for a long moment. In my first life, that conversation would have destroyed me. I would have cried for hours, wondering why my incredible achievement merited one sentence while Vanessa's furniture commercial was treated like an Oscar win. In this life, I felt nothing but determination. They'd chosen who to invest in, emotionally and financially. Soon, they'd see the returns on that investment, or lack thereof. The Nature paper came out when I was 28, 6 months before the NSF Awards Gala. It was the culmination of 3 years of intensive research, and it fundamentally changed how neuroscientists understood memory formation and trauma processing. The paper went viral by academic standards. It was covered in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and even NPR. I did a dozen interviews, appeared on a podcast with 2 million listeners, and was invited to present at a TED conference. My parents saw one of the articles. My mother called, her voice strange. Emily, I saw you were in the New York Times. Yeah, the paper's getting some attention. Your father and we'd like to take you out to dinner to celebrate. In my first life, I would have said yes immediately, pathetically grateful for any scrap of attention. In this life, I checked my calendar even though I already knew what I'd say. I'm actually pretty booked for the next few months. I have conferences, talks, meetings with funders. Surely you can spare one evening for your parents. Could I? Yes. Would I? No. Tell you what, I said, I'll be receiving an award in 6 months from the National Science Foundation. It's a really big deal, the Breakthrough Scientist of the Year Award. Why don't you come to that? I'll send you tickets. There was a pause. When is it? November 8th. It's on a Saturday at the Washington Hilton. Another pause. I could practically hear her calculating, checking whatever calendar tracked Vanessa's commitments. We'll be there, she said firmly. I smiled. Great, I'll send the details. I knew they wouldn't come. I knew because in my first life, I'd invited them to this exact event and they'd skipped it for one of Vanessa's community theater shows. But I wanted to give them the chance. I wanted to send them engraved invitations, follow up with emails, make it impossible for them to claim they hadn't known about it. I wanted them to have no excuse when they chose Vanessa again. Over the next few months, I sent them every detail. The date, the time, the location. I told them I was giving a speech. I mentioned that there would be press coverage, that this was the highest honor in my field for someone my age. I made it crystal clear that this was important. And 3 weeks before the gala, my mother called. Emily, honey, we have a small conflict with your award ceremony. Oh? I kept my voice neutral. Vanessa is performing in a production of The Sound of Music that night. She's playing one of the nuns. A speaking role? I asked, knowing the answer. Well, no, but it's still very important to her, and she specifically asked us to be there. I see. Maybe we could come to a different event? Do you have anything else coming up? I had a dozen things coming up. A keynote at a major conference, a lecture at the National Academy of Sciences, a ceremony where I'd be inducted into an honorary society. But I didn't mention any of them. This is the big one, I said. This is the most prestigious award in my field. I understand, but Vanessa, it's fine, Mom. Go to Vanessa's play. Are you sure? Because if you really need us there, No, I said, I don't need you there. It was the truest thing I'd said to her in years. She sighed, relieved. Thank you for understanding. We'll make it up to you. They wouldn't, they never did. But I didn't care anymore, because I'd spent 10 years building toward this moment. 10 years of excellence, of achievement, of becoming someone extraordinary, and I'd done it all without them. Their absence at this event wouldn't diminish my success. It would highlight it. They'd chosen to miss everything that mattered. Soon they'd realize what they'd missed. The NSF Gala was everything I'd remembered and more. The ballroom was magnificent, filled with the most brilliant minds in American science. I wore a custom-designed gown, emerald green, elegant, expensive, paid for with my own money. My hair was professionally styled, my makeup flawless. I looked successful, I looked confident. I looked like someone who'd never doubted her worth for a single second. The empty seats in row 17 were visible from the stage. When my name was called, I walked up to accept the award with my head high. The trophy was crystal and gold, heavy and real. The check that came with it was for $250,000, more money than my parents had earned in the last 5 years combined. During my acceptance speech, I thanked my mentors, my colleagues, my research team. I thanked the National Science Foundation for recognizing the importance of basic science research. I thanked everyone who'd supported my journey. I did not thank my parents. Later at the reception, a reporter from Science magazine asked about my family. My parents couldn't make it tonight, I said, smoothly. Prior commitment. That's too bad. They must be incredibly proud. I'm sure they are, I said, meaning the opposite. Dr. Walsh appeared at my elbow, rescuing me from the conversation. As the reporter walked away, she whispered, "Empty seats?" "Empty seats," I confirmed. "Their loss," she said fiercely. You know that, right? This is their failure, not yours." "I know," I said. And I did. The rest of the evening was a blur of congratulations, champagne, and networking. I was interviewed by 3 different news outlets. I was approached by 2 billionaire philanthropists interested in funding my research. I was invited to join advisory boards, editorial committees, and speaking circuits. By the time I left the gala at midnight, I'd secured another $3 million in funding commitments and had been offered a position at MIT, my dream job in my dream location with unlimited resources. I took a cab back to my hotel, rode the elevator to my suite, and finally allowed myself to feel everything I'd been holding back. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sad. Instead, I felt powerful. I'd done it. I'd become successful beyond my wildest dreams, and I'd done it entirely without my parents' support. Their absence tonight hadn't hurt me. It had freed me. I took out my phone and posted a photo to Facebook, me in my gown holding the trophy with the caption, "Breakthrough Scientist of the Year, thank you to everyone who believed in me." The comments poured in within minutes. Friends, colleagues, former professors, all celebrating my achievement. My parents didn't comment. They probably hadn't even seen it yet. They were at Vanessa's play, watching her stand silently in a nun costume. I set the trophy on the hotel desk and stared at it for a long moment. In my first life, I died before accepting this award. In this life, I'd accepted it without needing my parents' approval. That was worth more than all the crystal and gold in the world. The fallout came 2 days later. I was back in Baltimore catching up on work in my lab when my phone rang. My mother. I considered not answering, then decided I wanted to hear this. "Emily, I saw your Facebook post. The award looked beautiful." It was. "I'm so sorry we missed it. Vanessa's play went wonderfully, but afterward I kept thinking about you. Was it televised? Can we watch a recording?" "It was live streamed, but the stream's been taken down." That was a lie. The full ceremony was available on YouTube. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them to witness what they'd missed. "Oh," she sounded genuinely disappointed. "Well, congratulations. We're very proud." "Are you?" "Of course. Why would you even ask that?" I could have let it go. I could have said thank you and hung up and continued my life of benign indifference toward them. But something in her tone, the assumption that she had a right to be proud, that she'd somehow contributed to my success, broke my carefully maintained composure. "Mom, when was the last time you came to one of my events?" "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said. When was the last time you or Dad attended something important to me?" Silence. I'm not trying to be cruel, I continued, my voice calm. I'm genuinely asking. Because I can't remember a single time in the last 10 years that you've prioritized my achievements over Vanessa's activities. That's not fair, Emily. We've always tried to support both of you. Have you? Let's see. You missed my high school graduation for Vanessa's dance recital. You missed my MIT acceptance celebration. You missed my college graduation. You missed my dissertation defense. You missed my postdoc appointment celebration. You missed my lab opening. And you missed this award ceremony. But you've attended every single one of Vanessa's community theater performances, every pageant, every showcase. Vanessa needs more support. She's not as naturally talented as you. You've always been able to take care of yourself. And there it was. The same justification they'd been using since I was 7 years old. I didn't need support because I was capable. Never mind that everyone needs support. Never mind that I desperately craved their attention. Never mind that I'd killed myself, literally, trying to earn their recognition. You're right, I said quietly. I can take care of myself. I've been taking care of myself since I was 9 years old. But that's not the same as not needing support. It just means I learned early that I wouldn't get it from you. Emily, that's not fair. Isn't it? You spent my college fund on Vanessa's pageants. You've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on her acting classes, headshots, and LA rent. You've spent decades attending her every performance. And I've spent decades achieving things you can't even be bothered to witness. So tell me, Mom, what exactly have I gotten from you that's made your absence in my life unfair? She was crying now. We love you just as much as we love Vanessa. Maybe you do. But you've never shown it. And at this point, I don't need you to. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness. From liberation. I'd finally said out loud what I'd been feeling for years. I'd named the pattern, acknowledged the harm, and made it clear that I saw exactly what they'd done. And I'd told them I didn't need them anymore. That was true. I didn't need them. I'd built an entire life, an extraordinary life, without their support. I had mentors who believed in me, colleagues who respected me, and friends who celebrated my successes. I had funding, recognition, and opportunities beyond measure. I had everything except parents who cared, and I'd learned to be okay with that. My father called that evening. Emily, your mother is very upset. I imagine she is. She said you accused us of favoring Vanessa. I didn't accuse you of anything. I stated facts. Would you like me to list every event of mine you've missed versus every event of Vanessa's you've attended, because I've kept track? That was a bluff. I hadn't literally kept a spreadsheet, though I could have reconstructed one from memory, but my tone made it clear I knew exactly how lopsided their attention had been. We've tried to be fair, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, you've tried to be comfortable. It's easier to support Vanessa because she demands constant attention and validation. I don't. I just quietly achieve things and then feel disappointed when you don't notice. But I'm done with that now. Done with what? Done being disappointed? Done expecting you to show up? Done inviting you to things you won't attend? You've made your choice about which daughter to invest in. Now you get to live with the consequences. What consequences? You don't get to take credit for my success. You don't get to tell people about your daughter who won the NSF's highest honor. You don't get to bask in reflected glory you did nothing to create. You spent 20 years ignoring me, and now I'm returning the favor. That's vindictive. No, it's boundaries. You're welcome to your relationship with Vanessa. I hope it brings you joy. But you don't get to have a relationship with me that consists of you ignoring me until I do something impressive and then calling to congratulate yourselves on producing me. I'm done with that dynamic. We're your parents. Biologically, yes, but parenting is a verb, not just a noun. And you stopped actively parenting me when I was 7 years old. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was defensive. We did our best. Did you? Because your best for Vanessa involved emptying your savings, attending every event, and moving her across the country. Your best for me involved what exactly? Occasional phone calls? Texts that say congratulations with no follow-up? Missed ceremonies and broken promises? You don't understand how hard it is to balance two children with such different needs. You're right, I don't understand. Because you never tried to balance us. You just chose her, every time. And now you're upset that I've stopped asking you to choose me. Emily, I need to go, Dad. I have a lab to run, papers to write, and a career to build. All things I've been doing without your support for years. I'll talk to you later. I hung up and turned off my phone. I spent the rest of the evening in my lab, running experiments and analyzing data. Science had always been my refuge, and tonight was no different. Here, in the clean logic of research and discovery, I felt at peace. Around midnight, as I was preparing to head home, Dr. Walsh called my office line. I heard through the grapevine that you had words with your parents, she said. I smiled. The academic world was small and news traveled fast. Something like that. Good for you. Really? Really. Emily, I've watched you for 10 years now. You're one of the most talented scientists I've ever mentored, and you've built an incredible career. But I've also watched you carry this weight, this hope that your parents would eventually see your worth. It's held you back. I thought I'd moved past it. You had intellectually, but emotionally, you were still waiting for them to show up. Now you've closed that door. That's healthy. It doesn't feel healthy. It feels harsh. Setting boundaries often feels harsh to the people who benefited from you having none. But you're not being cruel. You're being honest. They made choices. Those choices had consequences. Protecting yourself from further disappointment isn't vindictive. It's wise. I felt tears prick my eyes for the first time since my rebirth. Not sad tears, but grateful ones. Thank you. You don't need to thank me, just keep being brilliant. And Emily, when you win the Nobel Prize, and you will, don't invite them to that either. I laughed and it felt good. Deal. The months after the NSF award were transformative in ways I hadn't expected. First, I accepted the position at MIT. Going back to my alma mater as a full professor with my own lab was a dream come true. I'd be working with the best minds in neuroscience, with unlimited funding and resources. Second, my work started reaching beyond academia. Tech companies were interested in my research on memory and neural plasticity. I consulted for 2 major firms, adding another income stream to my already comfortable salary. By 29, I was independently wealthy, not Silicon Valley wealthy, but more than comfortable. Third, I started building the family I'd chosen. I'd always been close with my research team, but now I actively cultivated those relationships. Lab dinners became weekly events. I mentored graduate students with the care and attention I'd never received from my parents. I showed up for my team's defenses, their presentations, their personal milestones. I became the kind of mentor I'd needed when I was younger. And in doing so, I built a community of people who actually cared about me. My parents called occasionally, awkward conversations where they'd try to reconnect and I'd remain polite but distant. My mother asked when I was moving to MIT, and I told her I'd already moved, 2 weeks prior. My father asked about my research, and I gave him a 2-sentence summary instead of the passionate explanation I'd have offered in my first life. They were learning slowly what it felt like to be an afterthought in their child's life. Vanessa, meanwhile, had moved to LA with my parents' financial support. She was working as a server while auditioning, and from what I gathered from my mother's updates, she was still waiting for her big break. She was now 27, and the window for child actors and ingenues was closing. But my parents remained convinced that any day, now she'd be discovered. I felt no satisfaction in Vanessa's struggles. She was a victim of my parents' enabling as much as I'd been a victim of their neglect. They'd convinced her she was special, that talent and hard work didn't matter as much as beauty and luck. They'd set her up for a lifetime of disappointment. But I also didn't feel obligated to save her. She'd made her choices, aided by our parents' terrible guidance. I'd made mine, despite their lack of support. We'd each live with the consequences. The moment I'd been building toward came in December, almost exactly a year after I'd set my new boundaries with my parents. I was invited to Stockholm. The Nobel Prize Committee doesn't announce nominees, but they do invite certain scientists to give lectures at their annual symposium. It's widely understood in the scientific community that these invitations are a precursor to future recognition. You don't get invited to speak at the Nobel Symposium unless you're on the shortlist for the prize itself. The invitation came via email on a Tuesday morning. I read it 3 times, my heart pounding, before allowing myself to believe it was real. Dr. Walsh called me within hours. "You got the invitation." I got the invitation. Emily, do you understand what this means? I think so. You're 29 years old and you're being considered for a Nobel Prize. This is unprecedented. I wouldn't win this year. I knew that. I was too young, too early in my career. But the invitation meant I was on their radar. It meant that in 5 years, maybe 10, I'd be standing in Stockholm accepting the highest honor in science. It meant I'd achieved everything I'd died trying to achieve in my first life, and I'd done it faster and better because I wasn't wasting energy on people who didn't value me. I called my parents that evening. It was strategic, calculated. I wanted to give them one final chance to prove they'd changed, though I already knew they hadn't. "I have some news," I said when my mother answered. "Oh, wonderful. We have news too. Vanessa just got called back for a major role. She's so excited." "That's great. Anyway, my news is that I've been invited to lecture at the Nobel Prize Symposium in Stockholm. It's essentially an indication that I'm being considered for the Nobel Prize in the future." Silence, then, "The Nobel Prize? That's the famous one, right?" "Yes, Mom, that's the famous one." "Well, that's just wonderful, honey. When is it?" "February 14th. "Oh, Valentine's Day. That's romantic. Are you bringing anyone?" I closed my eyes. Even now, even with news this significant, she couldn't muster genuine enthusiasm. She was already thinking of ways to change the subject. "I'm bringing my research team," I said. "There are also public tickets available if you'd like to attend." "Oh, we'd love to, but February is tricky. I'll have to check our schedule." "Of course, let me know." I hung up, knowing they wouldn't come. And I was right. 2 weeks later, my mother called to say they couldn't make it to Stockholm. Vanessa was competing in a beauty pageant that weekend. She was 27 years old and still doing pageants. But my parents would be there, cheering her on, just like always. "I understand," I said. "I'll send pictures." "We're so proud of you," my mother said, the words hollow. "Sure," I said, and hung up. Stockholm in February was breathtakingly beautiful. The symposium was held at the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, a stunning building that housed some of the most important scientific work in the world. I delivered my lecture to a room full of Nobel laureates, scientists, and journalists. I spoke about my work on neural plasticity, memory formation, and trauma processing. I explained how the brain could be fundamentally reshaped by experience, how identity could be maintained even as memories were processed and integrated. I spoke essentially about rebirth, about how someone could die and return as themselves, but transformed, about how trauma didn't have to be a life sentence. It could be processed, understood, and transcended. The irony wasn't lost on me. The lecture was received with thunderous applause. The Q&A session lasted 2 hours because so many people had questions. Afterward, 3 former Nobel laureates approached me to discuss collaborations. That evening at the banquet, I sat between a physicist who'd won the prize in 2018 and a chemist who'd won in 2020. We talked about our work, our lives, our paths to success. Both of them mentioned their families with warmth, parents who'd encouraged their curiosity, spouses who'd supported their research. I smiled and nodded and said nothing about my own family. Because they weren't part of this story, they hadn't earned a place in this narrative. Later, back in my hotel room, I posted a photo to social media. Me at the podium, the Royal Swedish Academy seal visible behind me, with the caption, "Honored to lecture at the Nobel Prize Symposium. Thank you to everyone who made this possible." The comments poured in. Colleagues, students, friends, all celebrating this incredible milestone. My parents didn't comment. They were probably posting pictures of Vanessa's pageant, where she'd placed in the top 10. A respectable showing, my mother would say, evidence that her talent was finally being recognized. I turned off my phone and looked out at the Stockholm skyline. In my first life, I would never have experienced this. I died before achieving my full potential, killed by the toxic belief that I needed my parents' approval to be successful. In this life, I'd learned the opposite lesson. I was successful precisely because I'd stopped seeking their approval. I'd channeled all that wasted energy into my work, my relationships, my growth. I'd become someone extraordinary not despite my parents' neglect, but because I'd refused to let their neglect define me. And the best part? They'd never see my trophy case. They'd never stand in my office at MIT, surrounded by my awards and honors and recognition. They'd never witness the tangible proof of my success because I'd never invite them to see it. They'd spend the rest of their lives hearing about my achievements secondhand through news articles and social media posts, always on the outside looking in. They'd chosen to be spectators in my life, so that's all they'd ever be. Over the next 3 years, my career continued its meteoric rise. I won the MacArthur Genius Grant. I was elected to the National Academy of Sciences, the youngest woman ever to receive that honor. I delivered the commencement address at Harvard. I was offered positions at every top university in the country, but I stayed at MIT, where I was building something special. My parents learned about each achievement through the news. I stopped calling them with updates. I stopped pretending we had a relationship beyond biological connection. They were strangers who shared my DNA, nothing more. They tried, occasionally, to bridge the gap. My mother would call with forced cheer, asking about my work. My father would send emails with links to articles about me saying, "We saw this and thought of you." But their efforts were too little, too late. You can't ignore someone for 20 years and then suddenly claim interest when they become famous. Vanessa, meanwhile, had given up on acting. She'd moved back home at 29, defeated and disillusioned. She was working retail and taking online classes for a business degree. My mother framed this as Vanessa finding her true calling. But I knew the truth. She'd wasted her 20s chasing a dream our parents had encouraged without ever being honest about her chances. I felt pity for her, but I didn't reach out. We hadn't been close in my first life, and we certainly weren't close in this one. She was my parents' project, their chosen child, their favorite. She could stay that way. I had my own life to live. The call came on a Thursday morning in October, 3 weeks after my 32nd birthday. I was in my office at MIT reviewing a graduate student's dissertation proposal when my phone rang with a Swedish number. I knew before I answered. You don't get calls from Sweden at 5 a.m. Eastern Time unless it's the call. Dr. Chen, this is the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. On behalf of the Nobel Committee, I'm pleased to inform you that you have been awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for your work on neural plasticity and memory formation. The rest of the conversation was a blur. I said the right things, thanked them profusely, agreed to the press conference schedule. But inside, I was screaming. I'd done it. I'd won the Nobel Prize at 32 years old. I was one of the youngest laureates in history. I'd achieved the impossible. The news broke within hours. My phone exploded with calls, texts, and emails. Dr. Walsh showed up at my office with champagne and tears. My research team threw an impromptu celebration. The MIT president called to congratulate me personally. And my parents? They called 6 hours later, after the news had been on every major outlet. I didn't answer. I was at a press conference fielding questions from international journalists when I saw their missed calls and voicemails pile up. I deleted the voicemails without listening. Later, when I finally had a moment alone, I checked my phone. 15 missed calls from my parents. 20 texts. My mother's messages were increasingly frantic. "Emily, we just heard. This is incredible. Please call us back. We're so proud of you. Your father's crying. We always knew you'd do something amazing." That last message made me laugh out loud. They'd always known. They'd spent my entire life treating my achievements as less important than Vanessa's participation trophies. But sure, they'd always known. I blocked their numbers. It was extreme, maybe even cruel. But I'd spent 32 years, 2 lifetimes, watching them choose Vanessa over me. They didn't get to suddenly claim pride in my success just because the whole world was now paying attention. They'd had countless opportunities to show up for me. They'd declined every single one. Now, when I was receiving the highest honor in science, they wanted to celebrate? No. They'd made their choices. Now they could live with the consequences. The Nobel Prize ceremony was scheduled for December 10th in Stockholm. As a laureate, I was given a generous allocation of guest tickets for the ceremony and banquet. I invited Dr. Walsh, my research team, my closest colleagues, and several mentors who'd supported me throughout my career. I invited my undergraduate thesis advisor, the professor who'd first encouraged me to pursue neuroscience. I invited my college roommate, who'd held me while I cried about my parents missing my graduation. I invited everyone who'd actually been there for me. I didn't invite my parents. My mother figured this out a week before the ceremony when she asked about travel arrangements, and I told her I hadn't sent them tickets. "What do you mean you didn't send us tickets? We're your parents." And we should be there. This is the Nobel Prize. You're right, it is the Nobel Prize. It's the culmination of my entire career, the highest honor in my field, and one of the most important moments of my life. So I invited the people who've actually supported my career, the people who showed up. Emily, you can't be serious. We're your family. No, you're my biological parents. There's a difference. Family shows up. Family supports you. Family celebrates your achievements. You've done none of those things for 25 years. Why would I want you at this ceremony? Because we're proud of you. Now you are. Because it's the Nobel Prize, and it's prestigious, and you can brag about it to your friends. But where were you when I won the NSF award? Where were you at my dissertation defense? Where were you at my high school graduation? You've missed every important moment of my life because you were too busy attending Vanessa's mediocre performances. I'm not giving you the opportunity to miss this one. I'm just not inviting you in the first place. You're punishing us. No, I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. Emily, please. We made mistakes, but we love you. Let us be there for you. You've had 32 years to be there for me. The time for that has passed. I hung up before she could respond. My father tried calling later. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. Emily, I know we haven't been the parents you deserved, but please let us be there for this. We want to make things right. I deleted it without finishing. They wanted to make things right. They'd had 3 decades to make things right. They'd had hundreds of opportunities to choose me, to support me, to show me I mattered. They'd declined every time. Now they wanted front row seats to my triumph. They wanted to stand next to me in Stockholm, to be photographed with the Nobel laureate, to tell everyone about their brilliant daughter. Absolutely not. They'd chosen to be absent from my journey. They didn't get to be present for my arrival. Stockholm in December was a winter wonderland. The Nobel Week was a whirlwind of lectures, banquets, and ceremonies. I wore a custom-designed gown, deep blue silk with subtle embroidery of neurons and synapses, a nod to my field. I looked elegant, sophisticated, and utterly triumphant. The ceremony itself was held at the Stockholm Concert Hall. I sat on stage with the other laureates, looking out at an audience of Swedish royalty, dignitaries, and my carefully chosen guests. Dr. Walsh was in the 3rd row, beaming. My research team was scattered throughout the front section, many of them crying with pride. My parents weren't there. When the King of Sweden handed me my Nobel Prize, the medal, the diploma, the certificate, I thought about my first life. I thought about dying in that car crash, convinced I was a failure because my parents had never acknowledged my worth. I thought about how much pain I'd carried, how desperately I'd sought validation I'd never receive. And I thought about how free I felt now, holding this medal, having achieved my dreams without them. The banquet that followed was magnificent. I sat at the head table next to a crown princess and a former laureate. We talked about science, about the future, about the responsibility that came with this honor. Later during the dancing, Dr. Walsh found me. "How do you feel?" "Complete," I said. "I feel complete." "Any regrets?" I knew what she was asking. Did I regret not inviting my parents? Did I feel guilty for excluding them from this moment? None, I said honestly. They made their choice. I made mine. She hugged me tightly, and on this, I'm so proud of you, not just for the prize, but for having the strength to set boundaries and honor them. I learned from the best, I said, and I meant it. That night, back in my hotel room, I posted a photo to social media. Me in my gown, holding my Nobel Prize medal, smiling genuinely. The caption read, "Tonight I celebrated with my family, the people who've supported, encouraged, and believed in me every step of the way. Gratitude to everyone who made this possible." The comments were overwhelming. Thousands of messages from scientists, students, colleagues, and strangers, all celebrating my achievement. My parents didn't comment. I'd blocked them so they couldn't. But I knew they'd see the photo eventually through mutual friends or news coverage. And I knew that when they did, they'd understand exactly what I'd meant by family. They weren't my family, not in any way that mattered. The aftermath of the Nobel Prize was both surreal and satisfying. I was interviewed by every major publication. I appeared on late-night shows and morning news programs. I gave lectures around the world. My research received massive funding increases. Universities competed to lure me away from MIT with increasingly absurd offers. I stayed at MIT, negotiated for more resources for my team, and continued my work. Because the prize wasn't an ending, it was validation that I was on the right path. My parents tried to contact me through various channels. They called my department. They emailed my university address. They even tried to reach out through distant relatives, asking them to pass along messages. I ignored all of it. 3 months after Stockholm, my mother somehow got my personal cell number. I'd changed it after blocking them, but she must have gotten it from someone. She called and I answered without checking the caller ID. "Emily, please don't hang up." I should have hung up immediately, but curiosity got the better of me. "What do you want?" "I want to apologize. Your father and I both do. We've spent the last few months thinking about everything you said. And you're right. We failed you. We prioritized Vanessa and we took you for granted. We assumed you didn't need us because you were so capable, but that was wrong. Everyone needs their parents." I waited. There had to be more. "We're so sorry, Emily. We know we can't undo the past, but we'd like to try to build a relationship now. We want to be part of your life." "Why?" I asked. "Because you're our daughter. Because we love you." "You love me now that I've won the Nobel Prize. You love me now that I'm famous and successful, and people are impressed when you mention you're my parents. But where was that love when I was 18 and needed help with college applications? Where was it when I was 25 and defending my dissertation? Where was it when I was 28 and winning the NSF award? We were wrong. We know that now." "You knew it. Then too, I told you explicitly, multiple times, that I felt neglected and overlooked. You dismissed my feelings every time. You told me I was being selfish, that Vanessa needed more attention, that I should understand. Well, I understand now. I understand that you only value me when other people are watching." "That's not true, isn't it? You missed every private moment, every personal milestone. But now, when my success is public and prestigious, you want to be involved. You don't want a relationship with me. You want access to my success. You want to tell your friends about your daughter, the Nobel laureate. You want family photos you can post on Facebook. You want reflected glory." Silence. "I've built an incredible life without your support," I continued. "I have mentors who are more parental than you ever were. I have colleagues who celebrate my successes. I have friends who show up when I need them. I have everything I need, and none of it came from you. So tell me, what exactly would you add to my life at this point?" "We're your parents," she said, her voice breaking. "No, you're the people who gave birth to me and then spent the next 32 years teaching me that I wasn't worth your time unless I was exceptional." "Well, I'm exceptional now. I'm one of the most successful scientists in the world. And I still don't need your validation because I learned a long time ago that your opinion of me is worthless." I heard her crying on the other end of the line. "I'm going to hang up now, Bipam," I said. "Please don't contact me again. If you do, I'll get a restraining order." I'm not interested in a relationship with you or Dad or Vanessa. You're not part of my life, and you haven't been for a very long time. The only difference now is that I'm making it official. Emily, I hung up and immediately blocked the new number. Then I sat at my desk and looked at my Nobel Prize medal, displayed prominently on the shelf behind my computer. Next to it were my other awards, the NSF Trophy, the MacArthur Certificate, the National Academy Plaque. My parents would never see this display. They'd never stand in this office and realize exactly how much they'd missed. They'd never understand the full scope of what they'd given up when they chose Vanessa over me, again and again, for 30 years. And that was fine with me, because I'd learned the most important lesson of my 2 lives. You don't need everyone to believe in you. You just need to believe in yourself. 5 years later, at 37, I stood at the podium of the Nobel Foundation's annual symposium. I'd been invited back, not as a lecturer this time, but as a presenter. I was introducing the new laureates, welcoming them into a community I'd been part of for 5 years. My life had continued to flourish. I'd made groundbreaking discoveries in neural regeneration that were revolutionizing treatments for traumatic brain injuries. I'd started a foundation to fund young women in science. I'd written a best-selling book about memory and identity. I'd gotten married to a fellow scientist, someone who understood my work, respected my boundaries, and never once asked why I wasn't close with my family. We'd built a beautiful life together, filled with love and mutual support. I had everything I'd ever wanted, and none of it involved my parents. I heard through the grapevine, a cousin who didn't know we were estranged, that my parents' lives had taken a downturn. They'd spent their retirement fund helping Vanessa, who'd gone through a series of failed business ventures. They were now in their late 60s, working part-time to make ends meet, while Vanessa, now 35, was finally, reluctantly, accepting that she'd never be famous. My mother had apparently told the cousin, "I wish we'd paid more attention to Emily. She was always so independent that we didn't realize she needed us too. Now we've lost her." When the cousin told me this, probably hoping to inspire a reconciliation, I felt nothing. They hadn't lost me. They'd never had me. They'd had a daughter they ignored, a child they overlooked, a young woman they dismissed. And that person had died. First, literally, then metaphorically, and been reborn as someone who didn't need their love. I was Emily Chen, Nobel laureate, MacArthur Fellow, member of the National Academy of Sciences. I was a wife, a mentor, a friend, a scientist. I was happy, fulfilled, and at peace. And I'd achieved all of it without my parents ever seeing my trophy case. That was my revenge and my victory. Not that they'd been punished, but that I'd flourished without them. They'd chosen to miss my life, and I'd gone on to live a life worth missing. In my first life, I'd died seeking their approval. In my second life, I'd learned that the only approval I needed was my own, and that made all the difference.